But anyway, the orders came through. I told them I wanted that I would like to go back to flying up organizations, people with airplanes. And of course, well, okay. Came through the Aerovac organization and special missions in Rhein, Maine, Germany. As a squadron, they had the C-54s for special missions and some 54s for also for Aerovac, and we had a twin-engine aircraft for Aerovac. So that's where I ended up there, and I was reported in there, and I said, well, we'll put you on, check you out. And I had, of course, I'd been flying the C-54, and I went into it. I made a few trips, and as co-pilot, and then they checked me out, and well, the man that was in the operations officer was a lieutenant colonel, and he was about ready to leave, so, and he left, and I ended up getting the job to get back again as the operations officer of the squadron. And the man that was commander, the squadron commander, was the man that I had worked with, was down in the operations end of the thing in the Pentagon. And everything I did, I had to coordinate with him. And he's the darndest guy I ever had to deal with, because he's always calling me up and to tell me a joke or something. And I don't know what he had to do, but none of us was overworked really in the Pentagon that I could see. But we had just busy work, so much work. And it's always something to read and something you need to know more about. And the one other things, it's just going backward but looking back, we really got into the business of having computers. Whoever heard of having computers in the military? And they had been working out all these deals. How are they going to use the computers? And the loading things for aircraft. You always had to go up the steps, walk up the steps to get on an airplane. And all this handling of luggage handling and all of these things going along with it. But we studied all this, the thing what was coming, and that the military would be doing the same thing in our thing. So this was one of the nice things we got into, and it was interesting. We had a lot of meetings and discussions on how I was just so how in the world would you in combat if you didn't know computers that doesn't make sense to me. And right after New Year's on the 1960, I guess it was 59 when we did this. In 59, yeah. And I was on a flight, and a guy that was assistant operations officer had the flight, and we were going to Moscow. We were going to pick up the ambassador, and we were in Berlin to pick up our Soviet navigator and radio operator to go into the Soviet Union. This was the only airplane ever of any kind of the West that ever flew into Moscow. This was our airplane, and then we go in to get the ambassador to Leonard Thompson was his name, and we had an Air Force representative in the embassy, and we got to know a little bit about how embassies run. And there's just a lot of interesting things that we in this that we could. Our time okay?
What did you fly?
C-54.
A C-54, like you had been told.
And I keep, I guess it's not very good for this. I keep going back on things
Okay.
when I remember. We have never, to this point, we had never heard of a C-54 crashing. But in the airlift, on the just a little before I left, one crashed, and I think most of the people were killed. That's the only C-54 ever to this day that I know of it crashed. And it's a wonderful airplane, you know. It is a wonderful airplane. It's of course out of date now and all that. And I enjoyed flying it. But anyway, I just was thankful to get this position well, now here we are, and I'm an operations officer. And there are other interesting things, but I don't know of much to say except that we were there available, and we had Bob Hope and all kinds of people come into the special missions. We had 2 aircraft that were Push, that were Push. You couldn't even use them as Iraq. They had to, but we had just for special missions. Well, one time, one of these airplanes that was geared with all the stuff in it, all this classified stuff, they had to redo it, and I brought it back to the States, and in fact, squadron commander came with me. And one of my helpers in the office had helped me, the pilot. We brought it in, and we took it to the big air base in Ohio, I guess. What's the name of where they? Well, anyway, the big base, supply base, and I turned the aircraft over to them. But I said I wanted to go, and they said I understood I was going to Texas for the work, and I said I'd like to go home and visit my mother, and I didn't ride to Texas, and so he said, well, I'm going to, that plane was going there the next day. I could go in on it. Well, we went out the next morning to get on the airplane, and I didn't know my right. I got the right number. It had an airplane and everything, all the paperwork, all different records. Everything was different records. This went to another airplane. It was a completely different airplane. And while they had it, we were working on it. And I don't know how they did all that, but I couldn't figure that it was an airplane. We didn't have the right number on it. But they said, well, it is there, right airplane. And so I rode down there to Talbot and got a plane right out to Waco. And an old twin boom C-119, I think, cargo trooper, the stuff that jumped stuff out the back. I got in one of those, and that's the first time I rode in one. And but brought right back into Waco. And just a few hours, I was back home. With my mother. Was scheduled to depart August of '61. We came back. I had been there just 3 years, I think. But I went to Homestead and checked in. I was going to be home in November, retired. They said, well, you've been extended for 2 years, and you're not going to be so then they were building. After we left, they started this thing that started the building of the wall over there in Berlin. And they called in the reserves and stopped all retirement, and for 2 years. And so I went in and got what I was going to be assigned to do. That's a short time. Well, you're going to be assistant base operations officer, and but it'd be there. Instead of a couple of months, you're going to be here for 2 years. So that's where I spent the next thing, and then a year later, we had the Cuba crisis.
Oh.
I had been at Homestead about a year. The operations officer wrote all kinds of responsibilities to keep things going at the base. We had the control tower. We got to control. That's under our jurisdiction. Be sure that the runway is always clean. And at Homestead, we had a force of, I don't know how many B-52s, but it was both SAC-based, Strategic Air Command, and that was the main thing there. It was the main business of the base. And one real interesting thing, I don't know how many people knew about this, but there we had an aircraft on alert constantly in the air. Every morning, an aircraft would take off at this set time, and one will land. And they come in back that went off the previous morning. So that you have one there ready to take into the air, get one to take off just after that one lands. And they fly down toward the Mediterranean and North Africa, and they refuel as they need to in the air, and they have a target, they have a nuclear weapon on board, and they all brief for what if something happens, this is probably going to be their target. And we had several other bases had this thing all over the country. This was sort of a touchy time right there.
Yeah.
And but we had enough aircraft in the air. If something happened, we could pretty well cripple the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
And this is now in October, and they had found activities in Cuba. Looks like they were building missile sites in pieces of equipment they knew of those missile sites. And they confronted Khrushchev with it and didn't get much satisfaction. And they get that word in President Kennedy. They got concerned about this, and he was in Chicago, I think it was, just for something, and he got a bad cold and just had to go back to Washington, and he had anyway, he had an excuse. He skipped to whatever he was going to do there in Chicago and went back, and nobody knew what was going on. But anyway, he confronted Khrushchev with what they'd found, and so that's what started. President Kennedy didn't want to fight a war, but they put in the blockade around. But all those ships, they wouldn't let any ships go in or go without inspection. And they stopped some of them, and that's another thing they had stopped. And it says here, Khrushchev warned Kennedy, said that's international war. Your international territory, and this is your grounds for war. To stop our ships like this. Well, that's right. And we are facing war if we don't get something done. So they took that risk. So we had all there were fighter bombers. They could drive bombs and they had guns. And we had a whole straw right out the door, out in the operations, and they were ordered to start the engines. And they had the engines running, and they'd been running for quite a while. They did that for a while, and then they'd refill them and run them but they kept them running. And they were just about. The deadline was up, and they were in about 2 or 3 minutes to go before it started to get off. We were getting ready to take it. I was out there and getting it out, and just and then watching the kid and getting it ready. And the first one's going to start taxi in about 2 or 3 minutes, and they called us. They said Khrushchev head back down. But that was a show to see all those aircraft that we had parked out of that aircraft. And of course, see, there's another aircraft. The Navy had one down there, and they had stuff going on it. And I don't know. And of course, all the aircraft, the Navy's people all around everywhere. So that's about it for the mission, as we're concerned. That's my view of what it was. And thank goodness the next week I got off. But the next day, Sunday, President Kennedy came down there, and they were all getting moved out and getting back to our place was full of people. And he drove all around all the air base and waved at people and everything. So that was then I had about a year to go after that. And but I'll tell you what happened that year. I got a new thing. Oh, well, I got promoted.
Yes.
I got promoted. I was on a flight. I don't know where I'd been. I had some quite interesting flights. I have to tell you about that one Sunday. These happened on Sunday. Things that happened on Sunday. There was a group of people from the Pentagon down there, and they'd been playing golf, and they had a special plane that had attendants on it and everything. And I think there's about 15 or 16 of them, these people. And the Space Commander called and says, "We got some people we need to get back to Washington tonight, before they go to work in the morning." And their plane went out. Something was wrong with the plane. So here comes all these people with their own attendants and everything, and this old C-47, and get them in that C-47. And I went as co-pilot, and other people that ended up working out of the office was the pilot, and we got them all in there, and that was my last flight there in the Air Force.